Good morning. Can I welcome everyone to this, the 8th meeting of the Justice Committee in 2014. Can I ask everyone to switch off mobile phones and other electronic devices completely as they interfere with the broadcasting system, even when switched to silent. The committee, item 1, the committee is invited to agree to consider a draft response to the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee, their inquiry into legislation procedures under item 5. I invite you to do that in private. Are you agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 2. Our main item of business today is an evidence session on Fire and Rescue Service reform. We'll hear from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and HM Chief Inspector of the SFRS in our second panel of the day. But for now, I welcome to the meeting John Duffy, Scottish Secretary of the FBU, John Hackett, Regional Organiser at Unison Scotland, and Nick Croft, Corporate Policy and Strategy Manager at the Edinburgh Community Safety Partnership. That's a long title, Mr Croft, but we'll see where it takes us. Can I invite questions from members, please? Oh, a flurry, a flurry. I have such a selection. I think I'll go to my left for a change. I'll take Sandra, and then I'll take John, I'll take Elaine, and then was it Christian or was it Roddy? Roddy. Okay. Sandra.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning, gentlemen. I just wanted to ask an overall question, having read through the evidence that's been brought in and responses. The vast majority of responses seem to think it's working very, very well. I just wanted to ask you, would you say that the reform has been a positive step forward in getting different agencies together and working together? That was my first question.
If you just indicate to me if you want to answer that question, if it's a panel question, the microphone should come on automatically. So who wants to take it first? Mr Hackett, thank you.
I think in respect of the support staff, the light isn't quite at the end of the tunnel, so it would be hard for our members to judge whether or not this has been a good thing or a bad thing at this moment. About half of the support staff are yet to find out what jobs they've been matched into, so to say it's a good thing at this stage would be difficult for them to say.
Mr Croft.
I think when I appeared last time before the committee, I'd noted that there was no discernible negative impact on partnership relations, certainly in Edinburgh, and that's been the case since I last appeared. There's been a number of initiatives locally delivered through the Community Planning Partnership. Good results on bonfire night, a new escalating concerns process for adults who may be vulnerable that may be not covered by the legislation. Some excellent work in our neighbourhood partnerships on community safety and antisocial behaviour and fire raising, so a generally positive progression in partnership working.
Why didn't it happen before?
I think it did, but not in the same extent. I think the wind has been put behind the sails of community planning generally across Scotland, so I think there's more impetus behind community planning and it's kind of encouraged more partnership working.
Mr Duffy?
I think from our perspective, there's so much effort being put into getting the 8 services together that the external certainly hasn't been our focus. But what I would say is that there's been nothing done in the last year that has put that back the way or prevented that work. It is ongoing. It's certainly just not been our focus.
A standstill, would you say? Or, yeah. Sandra, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Convener. I was interested in what Mr Hackett has said, and having visited, obviously, fire stations in my constituency and spoke to the people there, could you perhaps elaborate slightly on what you were saying? Is it because there's been lack of consultation or redundancy, or in regards to your concerns, you're saying it's not working for your members in Unison, but obviously all the councils that we've had feedback from seem very happy with what's going on?
I think the response I gave was the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that's the issue. People don't know what the future holds, and without knowing the future direction of the service for them individually, it's difficult for them to say whether this has been a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, at the moment, they're probably edging towards this has been a bad experience at this moment. Our members respect the political decision that's been made, but it's them that deliver it, and there has been difficulties in communicating some of the changes to our members. Things like strategic intent, the way in which some of these issues have been communicated aren't the best, and that's leaving people feeling quite, with low morale. I was speaking to people yesterday, they don't have a line manager. They have people they report to, but no one who's sort of overall responsible for their work. There's people, as I say, there's 228 employees affected by an admin review that was due to be finished in December. We're still waiting for that. I've spoken to managers in that area who no one's spoken to them. to find out what their views are and opinions on what the admin support for the service should be, and that strikes me as quite alarming, if I'm honest.
Chair, I know that we can ask the next panel perhaps more probing questions in regards to what Mr Hackett was saying, so I'll leave it for the moment. If you don't
Well, whose fault is it? If it's dragging, if heels are being dragged, I see there's no compulsory redundancies, but there's insecurity for people who don't know where they're going, timetables are slipping. Whose fault is it?
Well, I think it has to rest with the senior leadership team, ultimately, because they're ultimately responsible. I've been asking about the admin review, and I get told it's one person's responsibility. Now, I've not had the opportunity to speak to that person, but speaking to some of my other colleagues, that person has been identified to gather information, not to make a decision on the admin review, just simply to gather information. Now, we're edging towards the middle of March, and this review was meant to be completed in December. If I'm dealing with members who are managers of people in the admin side who have not been spoken to and asked what sort of admin support they see in their area, and we're now nearly 3 months behind, this is the issue for us. There is no light at the end of the tunnel at the moment.
Does anybody else want to pick up on that particular issue? It's supplementary. Well, we can put that to others later. John Finney, please, followed by Elaine.
Thank you, and morning panel. The evidence we have from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service alludes to the Audit Scotland reports that were done in respect of the 8 previous services in 2011, and if I can quote from their evidence, it says their work showed some significant differences across the country in respect of governance, operational policies and practices, performance, workloads and costs, but all of these variations were consistent with best and safe practice, nor with efficient service delivery. And if I may be parochial for a minute, there's specific mention of...
You're always parochial, John. It's perfectly all right. You're going to talk about the Highlands,
Thanks,
aren't you?
Yes,
I knew that.
Indeed. Thank you. The specific mention of the Highlands and Islands where, and I quote there were serious gaps in a number of operational areas. I appreciate it's very early, but Mr Duffy, are you able to say, is there any progress on the generality across Scotland and specifically in that identified shortcoming in Highlands and Islands, please?
I think the shortcomings have been well identified. I think the service knows where those shortcomings are. One of the big pieces of work that has been done is identifying the legacy issues, and more than anything else, that's causing the difficulties. It's not moving forward into the new service. It's trying to recover what was hidden, masked, disguised by the 8 previous services. Some of the things that have been discovered in the last year are actually quite shocking. And one of those, and certainly from the FBU perspective, the #1 priority for us will be the retained duty system, which is on its knees. Large parts geographically of our country don't have fire cover. How do you address that? This has for years been put in the 5 to 10 years away in the too hard to do drawer, and what the single service is now actively starting to tackle is issues that should have been tackled years ago, and there's a positive in that, and that's encouraging. What's made it difficult is we're trying to do this, and it would be hard enough to try and put those 8 services together into a single service at the best of times. But we're doing it with a background of a £45 million cut to the budget, which is making it incredibly difficult. There's timing issues involved in this. Part of that comes from the need to fully use and make most advantage of transitional funding. The transitional funding starts effectively on day 1 when the service starts. But you weren't ready to deploy that transitional funding on day 1. It's taken time to both identify where the problems lie and some of the potential solutions to that. And I think one of the things that certainly we've noted is that the timing of the transitional funding has actually caused, I'm not going to say harm, but it's caused more difficulties than it's solved, because there's been this urgency to get into that and use that to try and shape the service before you had maybe planned through all of the steps of the process. So I think from our perspective, in places where, I mean, I think previously I've commented that those out in the rural areas suggested that everything would go to the central belt, and people in the central belt suggested everything would go to the rural areas, when actually the truth of the matter is it's a blend of both. The legacy that we inherited had the wrong things in the wrong places. We had urban search and rescue and mass decontamination in rural environments, and we have the capability now of spreading that differently across the country. The problem that the service will face is that when they suggest we're going to move that piece of kit from that location A to location B, they get decried because, oh, that you're taking resource away. A piece of work that's going on just now is looking at how do you better support the retained duty system by putting more resources into those areas, but we're doing it in the wrong order. And the order is being dictated externally and principally through funding. What we should be doing is trying to get the resources into the rural areas first and then move the specialist kit around.
Is it your understanding that that funding is time limited, for instance?
Yes.
Is there an urgency?
Yes.
So the extension of that time limit would be beneficial?
An extension of that would be beneficial, as would more flexibility in well, the ability to hold over reserves from one year to another would be hugely beneficial.
What is the time limit? What is, you're talking about the transitional funding, when did it have to be used by?
My understanding is it's over the length of the project, which was 3 years from 2013.
Yes, you've got a supplementary on this as well, have you? Please do, yes.
Really
Sorry, John, you want to get coming back. Right, Alison.
Take Mr Duffy back to his statement that the retained duty system is on its knees. The region that I represent is largely covered, I think, fairly effectively by retained fire services in rural Angus and rural Aberdeenshire, and it's something that's valued. I rather wonder what you think the solution is then if it's on its knees.
Well, I didn't say it wasn't valued. What I said was it was struggling, and it is. It's on its knees. If you do a check on any particular day and see how many appliances are unavailable because we can't get a crew, it's staggering. Now, that isn't a criticism of the individuals. It's not a criticism of the crews. It's not actually a criticism of the service. It's a recognition that we, as a society, work and live differently from when the retained duty system was created, which, you know, we were going back to post-World War II.
You looked at me when you said that. That's cruel.
Purely coincidental. What a lot of our towns and villages that have retained stations were, if you go back even just a few years, they were almost self-sufficient. People lived and they worked within a relatively short distance from that location. And the retained duty system is based on a call-out, pager operating. People attend the fire station and they take the vehicle out and they attend the incident. But you only need to consider how many people commute in and out from our bigger towns and cities. How many people travel? I mean, if you are located in a town or a village and you have to drive any length of time to go to the supermarket, whilst you're driving there and driving back, you're not available for a fire call. So this isn't a reflection on the individuals. It's the system hasn't adapted to modern society and how we live and work.
And really, I asked what the FBU's position was and how you would solve that.
Well, how we solve it is you consider better the needs in those areas, but what we need to be able to do is deliver, and we're only talking really about the emergency side at this point. We need to be able to deliver a fire engine with crew, with equipment, as required at an incident ground. Now, how we do that, whether it's a retained duty system, whether it's a blend of full-time, part-time, retained, that's what we're discussing just now. There's a piece of work ongoing just now that's looking at how you better deliver that. And on a number of occasions, we have a minimum crew. And that minimum crew is a team of 4. If you've only got 3, that whole appliance is off the run. It's not available. Quite often, you only need 1 person extra to guarantee that you would get that attendance. So there's a piece of work to be done to identify just exactly where the worst of the gaps are. What do you put in the short term? And I think we've got some options for short-term solutions. You're then looking at a medium term. Is you can't simply employ more and more people on an RDS contract. We've tried that, and we've got stations in Aberdeenshire which have got more than the norm requirement. But that still doesn't guarantee you a crew. So we need to look at the crewing model. We need to look at the contractual arrangements, and we need to look at the numbers of people and where they're located. Now, the commitment from the Fire Brigade Union is we will come round the table and we will discuss that openly and try and find a solution. But as I said, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's our #1 concern at the moment.
I'll take Elaine next, then I'll take Roderick, please. Oh, John, sorry, you back in?
On a different matter, if I may.
Well, can I let somebody else in for a shorty and then you can come back in? That's very kind of you. This is so sweet. Elaine, followed by Roderick, and then I'll take John Finney again, because he's been courteous.
Not necessarily promising it's going to be short, actually.
It may be, it's up to me.
I wanted really to ask you about the process undertaken by SFRS when they took the decision to reduce the number of control rooms, in particular whether there was adequate consultation with staff and adequate discussion of redeployment opportunities for the staff affected.
I go back to my earlier comments about timing. The strategic intent document came out and almost superseded some of the work that had been done previously. There had been work ongoing, looking at what the best option for control rooms would be. Part of that work would be what happens to people who are displaced, and whilst that was ongoing, it seemed, certainly it gave the impression that it was superseded by the strategic intent and an urgency to get the estate strategy in play. And I think that goes back to my earlier point about the transitional funding and how you progress that. What that has led to, certainly in our view, is you know the solution, but you haven't worked out all of the creases yet. You haven't gone through all of the detail. And I think our members would have appreciated much more if that had been done in such a way as to give them more assurances about their future. So here's what's going to happen, and here's the consequences, and here's how it affects you as an individual. Now, what we have had is certainly some positive support from the Chief and the Chair, who've gone round and tried to reassure people. But of course, following on their heels have been the HR department telling them what can't be done. And I think what we need to do now is get further into the detail, because individuals need to know their security for the future. They need to know what options are available to them. And saying to people, yes, there will be something available, isn't sufficient. It's not reassuring enough. They need to know in detail. From the FBU perspective, what we'll be looking for is quite clearly is continuity of uniformed grey book posts. We know where people are going to be displaced. We know that there's jobs to be done and needing done in those areas, and we will be looking for our members who are currently in control but who are displaced to be moved into uniformed grey book condition posts that will allow them continuity in the service.
I don't know what grey book conditions.
It's our scheme of conditions. So.
Right, okay. Mr Hackett, do you want to come in on this? You were nodding.
Yeah,
Mr Duffy.
I think one of the big issues that I'm getting fed back, particularly from our rural members, is there's a sense that all the jobs are being sucked into the central belt. So we welcome the commitment to no forced redundancies, but that's meaningless if you're transferred to a post that takes a 2-hour journey to get there. And that's some of the concern that people are expressing. People are being matched into jobs that they may have had a supervisory or managerial role in their previous service. They're being matched into jobs in the generic pool that hasn't been job evaluated yet, so they don't know what the salary will be, they don't know what their responsibilities are. And again, that makes it very difficult for people to make a decision about their future, and it suppresses morale. Our view is it's the uniform staff and the support staff that will deliver the reform, and you need them to be, have good morale, wanting to do this, wanting to be part of this project. But sadly, people are making the decision to start leaving.
If I can be put okay on this particular instance, there's 15 staff at the control room. They're all actually firefighters control. They're not. They're all uniform grade staff, but a lot of them are. Well, they're all women. Some of them women in their 30s and 40s, unlikely to be able to be retrained to ride in appliances at that stage. What they seem to be being offered is a 170-mile round trip to Johnson, to the control centre at Johnson.
I think there's a couple of things in there. I mean, nobody's suggesting that the going on to a fire engine is the only alternative. What I think, and this is again back to the timing issue, is that there are other posts available, and we're working with the service, and we're working very closely and very positively with the service to develop those other posts and what will be available. There's many, many more jobs in the fire service than riding on a fire engine, and there's many more ways of progressing towards the fire service's strategic objectives than riding on a fire engine. So there are jobs available for people. There will be jobs available for our members who are displaced from Dumfries. What we don't have at this stage is the black and white of what they are. And that's unsettling for those members, and I understand that. But what they need to appreciate is, because of the way the timing has worked, we've had to put the cart before the horse, and we are now very actively working on specifics for those individuals, and then beyond those individuals to the members who are in the other control rooms that will be affected by this, by the change.
Thanks.
I mean, I appreciate you're obviously very, very important that you represent your members, but, I think the public would like to know also if you have any views on how a proposed closure of control rooms might affect delivery of fire and rescue in their communities, which I intend to put to the next panel, but if you don't want to comment on it, you don't. But do you think there are any impacts of that, possible impacts on delivery of the service to the public?
To be honest, the service that the public get is determined by the professionalism of our members, and I think that is unquestionable. No matter where they're located, no matter where they work from, the members that do that job do it with the utmost professionalism, and where they're located will have no bearing on the level of service that the public get.
There'll be no delays, there'll be no words that somebody doesn't understand. I mean, if somebody from Hoyk is saying something, I know it's quite difficult for people to ever know what the Hoyk person's saying, not that I represent Hoyk, so, it's a strong accent, and there have been issues before about, control rooms are not local, simply not understanding what somebody's saying.
Well, I'm from Dundee, so English is a second language to me. But Scotland has a wide-ranging population. We've got lots of people who bring lots of accents, let's say.
Or local knowledge. Let's move from accents to local knowledge as well. Well, knowing where a farm is.
Nobody's born with local knowledge. Local knowledge is developed as you work and as you train. And as I say, I think it reflects on the professionalism of our members that they do the job. We've got control rooms just now that cover huge land masses, and they manage perfectly well because the professionalism is embedded into the individuals. It's their job, and it's how they deliver that service. There's no magic formula for that.
I think it'd be helpful, Mr Duffy, for the public and for us to explain, you know, the different roles that the fire and rescue service perhaps plays in different parts of the country. I mean, it might be more rescue service in certain parts than fire, RTAs, you know, I don't know, hill fires, whatever, or you know, drownings, mountain stuff. It would be helpful if you tell us about a little bit about that, because that maybe impacts on the rurality and urban in a way that means resources have to be differently deployed, including different knowledge.
Well, it's a very fair point, and we mentioned earlier on Aberdeenshire was mentioned, and in that particular part of Scotland, there is a real problem with road traffic collisions. It seems that quite a number of people in that area think they can drive faster than they really can, and we have a lot of road traffic collision activity there. Now, this is where the service shows its flexibility, because the crews will train predominantly to do different things in different parts of the country. Where I think we have a role to play in the future, and one of the things that I think was missed when the Police and Fire Reform Bill was going through Parliament was in relation to, and I kept harping on about this at the time, was in relation to our statutory duties. Because we have a statutory duty to attend a road traffic collision, we don't have a statutory duty to try and prevent them. So I think that is something that the service takes on over and above its statutory duties. But around the country, we are starting to see, and one of the benefits of the single service is that the ability to deploy the more specialist resources. You can keep throwing more and more equipment at the same firefighters, but you can't just keep learning more and more skills. It's finite. So we've got stations that are expected to put fires out, deal with road traffic collisions, do fire prevention, community work, but also do urban search and rescue, mass decontamination, water rescue, line rescue, ad infinitum. You can't do that. So what the single service is starting to do, and again there's a piece of work ongoing in terms of a specialist resource review, is looking at taking that kit and equipment and actually specialising. So you will have a station that specialises in water rescue. You'll have a station that specialises in line rescue. And the more we get a chance to get into this, the more that will develop, and the more you will see the ability to deploy specialist resources across the country.
I think that's helpful to Katie, and I think it's helpful to the public also who may be following this or reading about it to understand the range that you do. I know I've got some supplementary. I want to take some people who have not been. I want to take Roderick, and then I'll take John Pentland, because you've not been in. Then I'll take Margaret, because that's a supplementary, John, you want, isn't it? Yes. So Roderick, then are you onto this as well, or something different, Roderick?
Something different.
I'll take John Pentland, then I'll take Roderick.
Mr Duffy, in response to Elaine Murray's question about the closure of control rooms, and I think you did say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you did know the solution. And I'm just wondering, how did you know the solution if you didn't believe that there was enough adequate time for consultation? And could you perhaps also tell me if the closure of these control rooms was on an evidence based?
I'm not quite sure what you meant by a solution. There was a piece of work that was being done to look at how a single service would organise its command and control function. And I think part of that is because we moved to a single service because of the scale of cuts that was coming to the service's budget. So the control project, if we go back a stage, the control project or control rooms have been getting considered for years. In the run-up to the single service, the 8 legacy, or the 8 previous services were already looking at how they dealt with their command and control structure. For example, Dumfries was earmarked for closure long before the single service came along. Lothian and Borders were talking to Fife about pairing up. They had talked to Strathclyde about taking all their calls. Tayside, Fife and Central were looking to merge. Tayside did a piece of work with Tayside Police that they were looking to merge. Grampian were looking to take over Highlands and Islands. But what was happening there is it was all disconnected. What's happened since the start of the single service is that they have looked at how do we provide command and control for a single unit. And it's a more cohesive view then of how you provide that. Now, whether the solution was 3 or 4 or whatever was almost a secondary concern. We don't represent desks and chairs and computers. We represent people. And our priority is what happens to the people. Now, clearly, if you're moving from 8 to less than 8, some people will be displaced, some may want to move, some may not want to move. Our concern as the representatives of those individuals is what do we do for them? How do they see their future? And I think that's exactly what we are doing just now in looking at where are the... I mean, some people will want to relocate, but those who can't relocate, what do we do for them? And so there isn't one answer to the control room. You could have, the service could have decided to deliver its control rooms in a number of different ways. There was no right answer, there was no wrong answer, but for each answer there was consequences. And it's fine, and I absolutely understand that constituency and local MSPs will argue for their community. I understand that. But as a representative for the whole of Scotland,
the committee's job here. The committee members, although they've given examples from their constituencies, they're not here as constituency members, they're here as members of the committee. So we're looking at the picture of Scotland-wide.
What I'm reflecting,
in fairness, committee members.
What I'm reflecting is that there are local MSPs who are running specific campaigns to...
Yes, understandably.
And I understand, but what I'm saying is I can't, as a representative of Scottish members, set one set against another. No. What we've got to look at is what do we provide for a member who currently works in a control room who is then displaced?
I think the point you made that there had been, if I may use the term in inverted commas, negotiations, as it were, prior to the single service with various control rooms about how they might do it was a point that I hadn't appreciated. It was historically, and in your words, it was well, I think in summarised it, patchy and disconnected. John, I'll let you back in, but I'd like to let others in to this for a minute. You're looking a bit peeved.
Yes.
You are peeved, but I don't care. Roderick, I'll let Roderick in, who's been waiting, then Margaret, who's also been waiting, and Christian after that. Roderick.
Morning, gentlemen. Mr. Hackett, in the written submission that we received yesterday, from Unison, there is a paragraph which reads, sections of the staff fear that as a cost-cutting exercise, areas of support services will be privatised. The poor level of communication and slow pace of job matching and job evaluation have given a considerable weight to these concerns. What's the evidence for that?
I'll be honest with you, there's none, but that doesn't detract from people's fear. And if you look at the course of events in other areas that are under reform, local government, colleges, etc., that tends to be the case. Privatisation is slowly creeping in. And what I would say is that that fear is compounded by, as it says, the lack of communication. We have members that provide catering, cleaning services, occupational health, for example. Now, there's a mixed economy across the 8 previous services on occupational health. That's currently under review. But as I say, I think that fear, if you like, would be focused probably in the catering and cleaning areas. As I say, it's unfounded at this point, but if you're a cook in one of the previous headquarters, you look around, you see what's happening in other areas of the public service. You don't know what's happening, your employer's not communicating with you, you're yet to be job matched. Again, this is another area that haven't had their job offers, if you like, for the future. So that's naturally going to raise a question about what the future holds, and privatisation's one fear that people have.
Okay, anybody else want to comment on that?
No.
Okay, could I just give a supplemental?
It's a Margaret Mitchell moment, but it doesn't matter. Yes.
Okay.
Roderick?
Just in terms of...
To remind you.
This submission heavily dwells on the question of poor communication and lack of direction from the top. To what extent have you made your concerns about poor communication and lack of direction known?
Every time we meet. To put you in a picture, we have an employee partnership forum that meets on a 6-weekly basis that has all the staff representative bodies and senior management. On an alternative 6-week basis, we meet with the head of HR or the head of the pay and reward project team, and our reps meet with managers and senior managers on a regular basis, and communication remains a constant issue. I appreciate the challenges for senior management. I mean, there's a lot going on, but the difference there is they're in control of the decisions, whereas our members aren't. And when you don't have that control over the future direction of your life, it can be quite worrying and challenging.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on. I've got Margaret, followed by Christian, John Finney, Alison and John Pentland.
Good morning, gentlemen. Obviously, a huge problem in the transition and moving to a single force has been the job matching and ensuring that displaced staff are part of that process and it's done efficiently and effectively. I was therefore astounded to read in the Unison submission that jobs are advertised without either salary or location. Could you elaborate on that and who's responsible for that?
There have been some challenges in the way posts have been advertised. I think that's compounded by the fact that there's 8 different sets of terms and conditions that are still in play at the moment. When a post is advertised, the post has to come out with the bottom scale and the top scale. It's human error and it's identified and rectified as quickly as possible, but it does take a level of vigilance on our members' parts. They're obviously very keen to know what the future holds for them, so I'd hazard a guess that all of our members are on the vacancy site every day, having a look at what opportunities are available.
Can you just explain? Sorry, have these adverts been corrected? Do you see
yes, yeah.
So
yeah.
This is gone now, this issue, this problem?
Well, there's still concerns about, I think, I asked questions a couple of weeks ago about how it's quality proofed, and I'm led to believe there's 1 or 2 people now responsible to clicking the button to post online, if you like. So I would like to think that issue has been resolved, but again, with our experience of the past, we're just keeping an eye on it.
And that's both salary and location resolved?
Yes, I think some posts previously there was an uncertainty on where the post may end up. I think if I can give you an extreme example, we had a member that was looking at being displaced. A job was advertised. It was too far away, so they decided not to take the job. It then transpired that where that location was set, you only had to be there once or twice a week, and a pool car would have been made available to you. Now, who knew about that? How was that expressed to people? And how many people didn't apply for that job on the basis of the travel arrangements that they thought they had to do? So again, to be fair, I think the HR team are aware of these issues and they are, looking to address them.
Okay. Could I perhaps ask, Convener, if the compulsory redundancy guarantee is going to continue after April 2014, as far as you're aware?
Yeah, no compulsory.
No compulsory redundancy, yeah.
On when, sorry?
After April 2014.
That's our understanding at this stage. We're sort of operating on the basis that job evaluation, everyone will be in the post that they're meant to be in by April next year. We do have fears that the timeline's slipping a bit on a few issues, particularly job evaluation. We're operating on, as I say, on the basis that the service will be in place, if you like, for the support staff by April next year. But like all public sector agencies, change is inevitable, so we'll be looking to certainly be part of our bargaining position that no forced redundancies will be there in the future.
And the staff leave issue will also be part of that. I see you, again in your submission, are saying the workload is increasing for many members of staff leave under the voluntary service retirement are not replaced, and there was kind of feeling that almost staff are paying the cost of the no compulsory redundancy guarantee.
Well, the difficulty that we face at the moment is there are a vast array of projects on the go to get the support staff structure and all the terms and conditions and everything else that goes with it is in place. That requires staff time. So, for example, job analysts to go through the job evaluation process. Now, one of our members might express an interest in becoming involved. They used to be in a team of 5. That's now a team of 3. The manager's left. Their senior manager may be on a project themselves and only in the office for 2 days a week. So I think the service is struggling to get the staff into these projects to then get the structures and the terms and conditions in place. So similar to what Mr Duffy was explaining earlier about horse and cart, you know, I've probably said chicken and egg more times than I care to mention in my meetings with the SFRS at the moment.
Thank you. Any?
No, I'm just going to move on unless somebody indicates they want to come in because I've got quite a list and I want to... Is that all right, Margaret? I want to move on. I've got Christian followed by John Finney, Alison and John Pentland. So you did get back in, John, you see. Christian.
Good morning, gentlemen. Just to follow up on Margaret's questions, Mr Hackett, you did put out that there is a problem to have position vacancies filled. To what extent does the service have a problem to recruit? You know, I do represent the North East, and I know there is a lot of competitions for jobs out there. And do you think this changing is the recruitment a big problem all across Scotland?
I don't think that recruitment is the issue. It's that posts are deleted. So there was someone there doing a job. That person's gone, then the post is deleted, so that then has an impact on the overall workload. There are some particular geographical issues on recruitment, and I think that sort of rests around mechanics around the Aberdeenshire area. The obvious issue, you're competing against, you know, the oil industry. Similarly, possibly with HR, but we're kind of trying to address some of those issues with the service at the moment, and that's why we're quite keen to get this job evaluation process on the go and finalised by next year, and any issues where they are having trouble in recruiting staff, that we're able to address that very quickly, because we're aware it has an impact on the service and it has an impact on our members.
So there are vacancies who have not been filled so far?
Well, no, there aren't vacancies as such. It's that posts are being deleted, that's the issue. I'm not aware of any vacancies sitting there for any extended period of time, except for maybe in 1 or 2 areas which are specialist areas.
Do we see some of the people who think that they might lose their job in a distant future, you know, taking an opportunity and leaving the service beforehand?
Yeah, there's quite a number of people doing that, absolutely.
Is that causing a problem across Scotland, or is it only regional?
I think, in a way where if someone's got 20 years of service working, you know, in a fire brigade, that person leaves. That's a huge body of knowledge that the service is losing there. And it's not 1 or 2 people. This is quite a number of people leaving. I'd be quite interested. We've not nailed down how many people have actually left the service since the formation of it. We're now down below 1,000. Voluntary severance has been relaunched, if you like. So we're expecting to see a bit of a take-up over the next few months.
Because with the Police Scotland, voluntary severance isn't automatic, and I know when evidence to us that we've had evidence the police sometimes when they've got key workers that don't want to give them voluntary severance. I take it that's the same for fire and rescue. It's not an automatic process.
No, that's our understanding, and that's why there's this sort of work going on at the moment to review the applications, if you like.
So if you're a key worker and your expertise to get the balance back, then the fire and rescue service wouldn't want to see you go and wouldn't, you know, be allowing you to go in that sense.
What I would say, with half the staff yet to be job matched, how can you make that judgment?
I think we've got the message about job matching and the evaluation.
Yep. Just if other members want to answer the question.
Yeah. I've given up. I've given up now. I've given up. They will take over. You know, I try to run my empire here, and I'm crushed. It's a democracy, which is most unfortunate for me. Yes. Do you wish to, Mr. Duffy or Mr. Croft? You're happy to just be entertained. Mr. Duffy.
We have a specific problem in Aberdeen, and the North East generally, and it isn't even with firefighters, it's with middle managers leaving, in such significant numbers as it's certainly on our radar as being a problem that needs to be addressed. There's a number of contributing factors to that. One is obviously the skill set that we give our middle managers is ideally suited to the skill set required in the oil industry. But also we've got difficulties with accommodation. So if you get people who want to join the service, house prices, rental prices, we're finding more and more people are sharing and accommodation that wouldn't normally be ideal. And contributing to that is the decisions that have been taken at a UK level on fire service pensions, where people would previously have used that as or it would have anchored them to the service. That isn't as attractive as it was, and therefore a move to a higher paid job in the oil industry is very attractive. So yeah, distinct problem in the North East.
And we've got solution on this. I know that, for example, the colour of the fire engine have lifted back to red, which is maybe a very good idea. But have we got a legacy of difficulty to recruit in the North East?
What colour was it in Grampian?
It was white. It was white. It was decided by the previous...
Strange people in the North East.
Very strange person indeed.
Can we move? I want to move on from various local areas and move on a wee bit now, because I would like to get on to the next panel. So I've got John Finney, Alison and John Pentland all back in for another time. So crisp questions.
Yes, thank you, Convener. In the evidence we got from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Board, we're told that they approved a working together framework. I wonder, are you involved with that, Mr Hackett? We're advised that it's a partnership working group established and perhaps if you can clarify if you're also involved in the partnership working group established between officers and Fire Brigade Union to consider the implications of estate proposals. Are you involved with that in addition to your employee partnership forum?
I think one of the first pieces of work I was asked to do when I started working with our members in November was to sign the working together framework. So I must confess I wasn't involved in the discussions in formulating that. I work on the basis that all of our discussions work within that framework. It's not something I tend to refer to, but it is the fact that we are seeking to work on a partnership basis. And if I can give you a good example of that, we've obviously expressed very strongly some of our concerns from members. We have a lot of pressure from people to want to lodge grievances. They want answers. They want to know, what they want things formally done. We've tried to support our members, but ask them to hold off on putting forward formal grievances to give the service space to start addressing some of the issues. Now, we're going to have to be careful about how long we hold that line, because we're going to begin to start losing credibility. And now, the members' desire, if you like, to get some of these responses will be too overwhelming, and they'll start to choose to lodge their own grievances, etc.
So you've personally always worked under that particular arrangement, working together framework?
Absolutely, yeah.
And presumably it lays down guidance about timeframes and the integrity of engagement that there is in every issue? There's an expectation that communication is clear to staff, there is consultation, etc. Where we feel that any action on the service doesn't meet that standard, believe me, we'd let them know. And again, to be perfectly fair to the service, they take measures to rectify that. So in the classic issue of communication, I know HR and some of the directorate heads are well aware of our concerns and have given us assurances that things are improving, and slowly they are. That's good. That's good.
I'm going to move on now to... May I?
I was just specifically on the state issue. So, given the level of properties that are to be disposed of, I wonder if Mr Duffy maybe would want to comment on that.
He didn't indicate he did, but if he does, do you, Mr Duffy?
I think the primary concern for us in the state strategy was the control room issue. Most of the rest of the estate strategy falls more into Mr Hackett's remit. But control was our big concern.
Mr Hackett.
If I can just give you two contrasting approaches. Led to believe that control room staff were given sort of one-to-one time with managers to discuss the impact of the closure of a control room in their area. People in a workshop were notified of when they were moving with an email that was pinned up on a notice board.
Yeah.
Now, that's the two extremes, and I would like to think that the service is improving, as I've said earlier.
It's not good people skills, and it's not rocket science
no,
to
and I think,
remedy that. No.
Yeah.
Can I move on, please, to Alison, John Pentland, and at a very pinch, Sandra White?
It's really a follow-up question. I wanted to return to what Mr Duffy said about representing all of his members across Scotland in relation to the fire control room closures. And it hasn't reflected particularly the views, I don't think, of those in the north and the north east. We've got written submissions here from someone working in Inverness control room who says that to say that local knowledge is not important and can be easily transferred is naive at best and at worst insulting, and concludes that a generic response to the over 90 retained stations that they are responsible for, it would be impossible for a large control room in the Central Belt to provide the level of support that these stations and communities currently receive. And I know that when I visited Aberdeen, the FBU there told me that local knowledge is being underestimated for rural non-postcoded areas. And they were particularly concerned about when the system crashes and they resort to pen and paper, they do need the local knowledge. So I wondered if you wanted to respond to those particular issues that your own members have raised.
Well, members are absolutely entitled to raise these issues, and of course they are going to make the strongest argument that they can to try and defend their own location. I don't have the luxury of considering it from just one perspective. The Scottish officials need to consider this from across the whole of Scotland, and I'm
not talking about defending a particular station. I'm asking you to address the concerns that have been raised about whether or not you're actually underestimating the idea that rural knowledge, local knowledge is important.
Well, that's simply down to a difference in opinion.
Okay.
I have to say, I've had difficulty sometimes finding farms in my constituency where you've just got the name and they think you know where it is. And they say turn left at the red pillar box past the wood and you'll find, that's the instructions. It's not on a map particularly well indicated. And I think in some instances there is an issue perhaps for us with, across rural areas of knowing exactly where that farm is in particular, or a hamlet or something that is not easy to find otherwise. And I think it's an important issue, Alison. Yes.
That was my follow-up. If I might ask just a discreet question about the college at Gillane and whether witnesses have any concerns about the closure and about the move of staff to the main centre at Whites Mill.
No.
I didn't hear the question.
Sorry. Whether witnesses have any concerns about the closure of the college at Gillane?
No.
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 Okay.
Right. I'm moving on now to Sandra.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's just a very small one for Mr Hackett, just to clarify for myself and the extra submission which Unison had given us. Can you clarify, and it was an answer to Margaret's question, about challenges in the way jobs are advertised? That's now resolved. You mentioned that. The other one I wanted to raise with you was, which Rod had already raised, in regarding to the fact of the paragraph that you mentioned in here about support services will be privatised. That's your very words. You said in your statement to Rod, there is no evidence of this. Now, I was a shop steward myself, and I would think it was quite irresponsible for a trade union to put that out. To me, that is more fearful to staff when there's absolutely no evidence that this may happen.
I think if you read the paragraph,
I've read it.
Sections of the staff fear. Now, I'm expressing people's fears. They're not my views, they're views that people have. We've given assurances that I've not heard any senior leader, anyone from the senior leadership team talk about privatisation at all. No. We've been giving members that assurances. You have asked for evidence. This is a view that is expressed by...
I just wanted to clarify that point, because in the evidence that you gave back to Rod, you gave examples of this may happen because of public servicing. What's said, that is what you said. But what you're saying now is that there is no evidence at all of privatisation, and basically you are giving members assurances that this isn't going to happen.
Well, I'll take you back to one area, which is the occupational health and wellbeing. There's a mixed economy. Some services delivered that in-house, some services delivered that outside of the service. That's currently undergoing a best value review, and we don't know what the outcome of that will be. It might be keep all the services in-house, might be privatise all of them, might be a mixture of the both as it is today. That's the only area that I have personally had any sort of discussion around privatisation, if you like. But as I say, I was expressing a view that members have
clarified. You simply say sections of the staff fear, but you're not saying it is happening. No. So that
well,
will leave it at that.
On the record,
that is on the record several times. Right. Can I thank the witnesses very much for your evidence, and I'm going to suspend till 11 o'clock for the next panel. Right. Thank you. Right, we now resume, and I welcome meeting Pat Waters, Chair of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Board, Alistair Hay, Chief Officer of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and Stephen Torrey, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And thank you very much. I know you were sitting through the previous evidence session, and by special request, John Pentland shall ask the first question.
Thank you very much, Convener. Panel, as the convener said there, you did listen to the previous evidence, and I'm sure you will agree that much of that evidence was in and around the submission that came from Unison Scotland, where they spoke about, serious lacks of consultation and not being sort of part of the, I suppose, the ring to when decisions are being made and when they just feel as if they're being cut out the loop. Is that deliberate on your part, or is it maybe just...
If I could maybe initially answer that, and if I could bring in the Chief Officer, Alistair, here as well. Can I say that some of the stuff that was discussed I didn't recognise? For instance, the Partnership Forum, I chair that committee. There has been little controversy at that committee. I have no doubt whatsoever that other meetings that the officers, both from the Fire and Rescue Service and from employee representatives attend, there is detailed discussion. When it comes to the Employee Partnership Forum, there's never been an issue of real concern raised that I would want to take forward. As a matter of fact, at one point at the back end of last year, I questioned the value of the committee to my colleagues, the trade union movement, because we were having reports nodded through rather than discussed. And that, to me, indicates that the work elsewhere was actually going on quite well. I am quite happy, subsequent to this evidence, to go back and ask what is the discussion going on, and if there is any concern. Can I also say that it was absolutely right that there was an email pinned to a notice board to inform employees of discussions that had taken place earlier. That was to reaffirm individual meetings that happened in workplaces, and so that people are aware that these meetings have taken place and the discussion at these meetings were contained within that email. It was not informing people by email, but confirming the discussions that had taken place individually. So therefore, it's absolutely right there's an email on the notice board, but why was it there? It was to confirm meetings that were already taking place and what the content of those meetings were. I'm quite happy to take forward the situation. Can I say that the other thing, John, that's important to mention is that the strategic intent document was vitally important to the service and to our staff within the service, because without agreeing the strategic intent document, we had no way of letting staff know where they were going to work, who they were going to be working to, and what jobs they were going to be going to. And can I also say we have reaffirmed on various occasions and at every time possible there will be no compulsory redundancy within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. It's part of the guarantee that government gave to staff when the single service was formed. There will be no compulsory redundancies within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Chief Officer.
I listened to all the evidence that was given, and some of it I would have to say I was quite concerned about, and like the Chair, I didn't always recognise all of it. If that's the evidence that's been given, I will certainly go back and look at the practices that we have within the service to make sure that what we are doing is treating our staff, the people that work in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, as equitably and as fairly as we possibly can. We have to recognise that we're going through a major transition process at this moment in time, and it's absolutely understandable that staff are anxious about the changes that are going on. What we are trying to do is to set out to them, I think the expression was light at the end of the tunnel. What we are trying to do is make sure that as early as we possibly can, we set out for staff what the direction of travel is and where we are going to end up at the end of that. And your specific question was, are we excluding Unison? Well, we're not excluding any of the trade unions or representative bodies. I'm very encouraged by the fact that what we have produced is a partnership framework, and we've got the supporting structures to enable that to work effectively. It is early. It's a different approach. But I think the success that we've had in bringing the service from where we were to where we actually are at this moment in time, and in no way underestimating the challenges that lie ahead of us. And no little part is due to that effective partnership working. And when issues are raised by Unison or any other trade union, we are absolutely in listening mode, and we will seek to improve that. I think that's the essence of partnership. Partners cut each other a little bit of slack at times, and partners work together for the greater good. And that's the approach that we are adopting. And we're absolutely, sympathetic to staff. We understand their anxiety, and what we can do in the short, medium and long terms to quell that anxiety, we will do.
Don, do you want to come down?
Convener, I welcome that assurance that what you've just said there, and hopefully, Unison will be kept up to speed on things that are happening, because it is a major change within the service, and to go on that journey, everybody has to be on board on the bus, and we need to make sure that people don't be cut out the loop. The other question I would like to ask would be with regards to again the control rooms, and I would maybe ask the panel to expand on the inspector's view that retaining more control rooms would risk confusion and failure in the services work.
I'll just start with that one, given that was my submission, just to expand a wee bit on that written submission. It's just a fairly straightforward logical argument, I think, that if you were designing the Fire and Rescue Service in Scotland from a blank sheet of paper, you wouldn't design it with 8 control rooms you have in place, one which covers about half of the population, the other 7 covering the other half. Now, in the past, when the 8 Fire and Rescue Services were operating, it was normal but reasonably unusual to cross borders. So most of the work that was done within a service area. Now, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has started to change that. And there's a lot of appliance mobilisation taking place across what would have been previous borders. And my argument is that will continue, I think, and I hope it will continue. I think it's good value for the public in Scotland. But the argument is if you have 8 different groups of people trying to coordinate those assets across the country, when they're being mobilised in a very different way to the past, then you're building in an additional risk of some sort of operational failure, some lack of loss of control, some difficult decision making. So it's just a simple, having borders in place where they're not necessary it might cause confusion and difficulty.
Does that reflect, and I pose this as a question as a statement, does that reflect the changing service that the Fire and Rescue Service has to deliver, say, over the last 50 years, which I perhaps raised in looking at the different kinds of road traffic accidents, chemical spillages and so on. Does that reflect that as well, is what I'm getting at, rather than just fire engines going out to fires?
Yeah,
it still happens.
It reflects 2 angles, actually. One is exactly as you're describing, so specialist resources are being made more available across the country rather than retained within our service area, but also there are examples we are seeing of mobilising frontline fire appliances which are getting to an area more quickly than would have been the case in the past when it was retained within a service area.
Mr Hay, do you wish to mention something about that from the operational point of view?
Certainly it is the case that fire control rooms are integral to the operational effectiveness of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. But the 8 legacy control rooms that we have inherited, they were designed to support 8 separate fire and rescue services. What we have to do is we have to put in place a control room infrastructure that supports a single Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And there's no doubt about it, and I agree with the comments that were made by John Duffy earlier on. It's the professional knowledge, the skill and the expertise of the staff that work within those control rooms that ensure that they are an integral part of an effective fire and rescue service. The proposals that we have put forward, at all times what is foremost in our minds is not to compromise the safety of the communities that we serve, nor to compromise the safety of our firefighters. And what we intend to do is do this in a very controlled and a very methodical way to ensure that the professional knowledge that the staff actually have is effectively transferred into the new infrastructure that we're putting in place. In my mind, it will certainly be a far more resilient infrastructure. because, as Mr Torres just alluded to, at this moment in time, each of the 8 separate fire and rescue services see the resources that are available to them within the legacy fire and rescue services. What we want to be able to do is put in place a control room infrastructure where they can see all the resources that are available. They can mobilise any resources from anywhere in Scotland at any time. And in this way, we don't have artificial boundaries. What we actually have is the appropriate resource being mobilised immediately by the control room that identifies where the risk actually is. And I think that will lead to us having a safer service, and by working on a single mobilising platform, any opportunity for there to be confusion there or delays will be absolutely minimised.
Move on. Roderick, Elaine, Christian, then John Finney.
Gentlemen, perhaps I could begin by just referring to Police Scotland's submission, where they indicate discussions are continuing between the two services as we move to implementation of our respective change projects with a view to seeking opportunities for collaboration on issues such as procurement, ICT and joint working where appropriate, such as in facilities from which major incidents and planned events might be commanded. Could you perhaps just tell us a bit more about the discussions taking place?
We've got a whole series of discussions that are actually taking place between ourselves, Police Scotland, and we've actually brought in the Scottish Ambulance Service to that. It's the three, not the sole, but the 3 major emergency services here within Scotland. In terms of our enabling infrastructures, and our opportunity to spend public money as effectively as we possibly can. We have only in the last fortnight the respective chairs and chief officers of the service have come together to discuss the progress that we've made to date. We've actually set up a working group. That working group, which has senior management within the 3 services, but they'll be bringing their work directly to the chairs of the respective services and through the chairs to the boards. We're looking at what our intentions are in terms of property, ICT systems, vehicles, everything like that, to see whether there is an opportunity for us to share and where our plans would coincide and we can actually get better value. At an operational level, one of the things that we have done is we have ensured that we are coterminous with police in terms of what we call our service delivery areas and what they call their local policing areas. And we have, we're working at this moment on a memorandum of understanding. That memorandum of understanding is building on the legacy ones that were in place from the previous services, to make sure that if we have to respond to different types of emergencies, not only the police, fire and ambulance service, but on top of that, anybody else that can add their skill set, from the voluntary sector perhaps, will come together and more effectively respond if and when citizens of Scotland require the response of an emergency service.
Are there any particular difficulties with collaboration?
I think there are no particular difficulties with collaboration because people come to this with a willingness where it is appropriate to collaborate. Clearly, there are different needs within the 3 services. We're not the same services. We've got different statutory footings. We've got different operational protocols that we have to operate to. But by speaking, by discussing, by exploring, by not allowing artificial barriers to arise, if there is that opportunity for us to be more effective, either in service delivery or in the way that we spend public money, there's an absolute willingness to do that.
You'll be collaborating at, because certainly attended instances myself where obviously operational collaboration took place. A scene where the ambulance service, the fire and rescue, they're getting somebody out of the river, and the police were there as well. So that already happens. Yeah. So what level are we talking about now? A higher level of collaboration rather than going out to a scene, an incident scene.
Yeah. I think it's important that collaboration, down at a very operational level, continues, and I'm sure the evidence that's been brought to you is that reform has in no way jeopardised that.
I was there when it happened, and I was very impressed. I'm talking about managerial.
So at that level, it will continue. But as I said there, we're actually speaking at chair and chief officer level,
yes,
to make sure that where there are opportunities for us to collaborate to improve our service delivery or to get better value for spending public money, we will absolutely seek to do that. So it is at all levels between that frontline operational, including everything in between, right up to the chair and the chief officer levels.
I'm quite simple, so can you give me an example of what that might be at that level? So examples of things that are happening now or are on the horizon is sharing of premises. Okay. We've got discussions on collaborations. If you just go along the road to Newbridge, for example, a legacy arrangement from Lothian and Borders within the workshops there is that one of the bays is occupied by what was Lothian and Borders, now Police Scotland. So we're looking to collaborate on things like, workshops, discussions over, ICT systems, all of that type of collaboration. Some is in place at this moment in time, and there are certainly ongoing discussions about how we can enhance that in the future. Roddy,
just if I could add,
sorry, yes.
Just to add to it, I mean, certainly, if you look, there is good examples, particularly in the rural parts of the community, where we, both police, fire and ambulance share the one facility in communities. We would like to see that expanded as we are trying to develop new services, and we are talking in conjunction with each other. If there is a new service developed, can we fit in with each other? For instance, where does emergency ambulance sit? Where does our paramedics sit? Like say when they're not in their station. We've got facilities all over Scotland where it would be much more appropriate for them to sit than to sit in lay-bys or in industrial estates. And that's the type of discussion we're having, as well as sharing premises about how we mobilise and operate together.
Thank you. That's helpful to give examples. Roddy?
Okay, just a slightly different matter. In written submission, SFRS said the strategic challenge for the new service is to bring consistent good practice to all parts of the country. At this early stage, any straws in the wind I'd like to comment on that?
I think to contextualise that, we had far more in common across the 8 services than actually separated us. However, particularly in the last decade, with the introduction of the integrated risk management plans, the approaches have been different within the 8 legacy services on how they drive down risk for their local communities. So there is a great opportunity there to look at the approaches that were taken within the different services, contextualise them, yes, but where they're recognised as best practice, to roll those out across the whole of Scotland. And by rolling it out across the whole of Scotland, what that does is continually improve the organisation. What you have to do when you're making changes, of course, is understand that this has an impact on staff, and what you need to do there is support them appropriately, particularly if it's an operational matter in terms of developing the training and developing the equipment. So it's an ongoing process. I think we've made very good progress up until now, but it will take us a number of years before we completely harmonise this. But then the challenge will be what's next, because we need to continually improve the services that we deliver.
Are you able to kind of draw any examples to our attention?
On some of the practices that we've done?
The good practice that you're trying to roll out?
Well, there's, one of the best examples we have is from the Glasgow Housing Association, which is one of the biggest social housing providers in Europe, and through the partnership work that was initiated by Strathclyde Fire and Rescue Service. What we have seen within the Glasgow Housing Association area, getting on to nearly 3 years now, there hasn't been a single fire death within those that housing stock. So how did that actually come about? The challenges that were addressed there, how did they address them? How did the communication processes between the different agencies actually work? If we can roll that out across the rest of Scotland, you could see a significant reduction in risk for the people in Scotland. So that's an example of excellent practice that we've already picked up on, and through discussions we're trying to share across the rest of Scotland.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elaine, followed by Christian, please.
Thanks, Convener. First of all, on the issue of the displaced staff from the control rooms, Mr Waters said that there would be no compulsory redundancies. However, if people are having to travel 170, 200 miles to get to work, it may not be an opportunity that they could accept. Are you able to guarantee that people will be offered appropriate redeployment and retraining by April next year? Good. Can I also ask about... Mr Waters also mentioned work that was being done on shared facilities. Was there any discussion on the possibility of shared control rooms or control rooms being shared with other blue light services while you were looking at the rationalisation of control rooms?
Yes, I think certainly we had quite a detailed discussion about whether we would, that there is a difference about having a joint control room and having a shared control room. A shared control room would share the facilities, and a joint control room would share the control. I think when we looked at what the situation was, we had both ourselves and police looking to bring together their control rooms. You had ambulance who'd already set out their national control room facility. When we looked at it, the risks of trying to integrate all the control rooms was too great for us to bring that control rooms together and at the same time trying to marry it up with other services who were trying to bring their control rooms together. Is that something that we'd look to in the future? Absolutely, we'd look to something like that in the future. As you're aware, a control room is not when we put in a new control room, it's not a new control room forever. You're talking about a period where you have to refresh that type of facility. And certainly, when we look to refresh, we would be starting discussions about now with our other partners in both police and ambulance about whether there's a future to look at whether we could have a truly joint control room. But at the present time, it was felt that the risks to the people of Scotland was too great to try and do that at the present time. Where there's an opportunity to share facilities, we have tried to take that opportunity to do that. But at the present time, we were looking at the facilities that we have, the facilities that the police have. They're looking and we are looking to use existing facilities so there's no additional cost. So we're not going for a new facility.
In terms of the technology that we use in the new control rooms, I know in the police control rooms there's new technology is part of the new control room system, and has been some concern about whether that's going to be operational in time. Is there any similar concerns within the fire service, or are you using existing technologies in the new control rooms?
Well, there's certainly we're developing new technology, and we are in discussion at the present time. But remember, our strategic intent is a 3 to 5 year programme. So we are looking to develop that, test that, and make sure that what it is operational before we even move to change any of the control rooms, with the exception of the police in Galloway.
And finally, there's a statutory community planning obligation on the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. How do you see that operating? How does that operate in practice?
We'll pass that to the Chief Officer.
One of the benefits of reform, as I interpret it, is the appointment of local senior officers. So each of those local senior officers, in conjunction with the local authority, has to agree the local fire plan for that local authority area. But one of the main vehicles for enabling an effective local fire plan, because we're all about driving down risk, but we understand that we cannot drive down risk in isolation. We play a major part in it, but it's a contribution from partners within health and social care, education, and wider that make a difference. So we're absolutely committed to that partnership working. The responsibility will be delivered through the local senior officer in developing that local fire plan, but that local fire plan has to and does link directly into the single outcome agreement within that local authority's area.
So it's not just a sort of bilateral discussion between the community authority, the local authority and the fire service. You have the other players, the other blue light services involved in those discussions as well.
We've absolutely widened it out, and if you look at the consultation process that we went through for the production of our first local plans, which will come into effect in April, you'll see that we've had responses from a wide variety of partners and stakeholders within given geographic areas of the country. So we're committed to, not just legally, but committed to, because it's the right thing to do, to work in partnership so that we can empower others to help us to meet our outcomes. But equally, we're a fantastic organisation that brings a lot of know-how, a lot of resource, fantastic brand. We're brilliant at engaging with people. We want to bring that, to local partnerships through the community planning process.
And has that process actually resulted in any change? I mean, I know it's very early days, but are there particular changes that you've seen as a result of that process at the moment? Or recommendations, things that could be done better that you've become aware of?
One of the great things about community planning is it takes place within local communities. So there's good practice, and we are. And I'm sorry, I'm beginning to sound a little bit like a management consultant here, but
please don't. Please don't.
I know. I'm trying to stop myself.
My eyes will blur.
I'm trying to stop myself.
Blur.
But we've got to make sure that we're a learning organisation. So where good practice happens anywhere in the country, how do we ensure that in another part of the country they've picked up on that? Doesn't mean to say that it'll work in that different part of the country because of different circumstances, but at least they've got the opportunity to consider why things went well and is it appropriate for that local area. And one of my favourite examples is from my time in Tayside Fire and Rescue Service, where we in the fire service had quite a lot of problems with what we call secondary fires, which is basically bins catching light and any bits of rubbish that are lying about, people just setting fire to it. And it was predominantly youths on the summer nights that were doing that. Yes. At the same time, the police were receiving lots and lots of nuisance calls because, kids were just being kids, not necessarily doing anything bad, but when people see large groups of them hanging about on street corners, they get concerned. So the police were getting lots of those calls. So what we did in the fire service was we just turned up in our fire appliances, and they're like magnets for young people. So we parked them up in the local parks, and all the kids started coming along and speaking to the local firefighters. And what the firefighters then did, they said to them, do you want a game of football? So they started playing football with the kids, in and around the fire appliances. And what we noticed was that the number of secondary fires that we were receiving, it just disappeared. And equally, the number of nuisance calls that the police were receiving, just disappeared. And through time, we started developing relationships with those youngsters. So you would say to them things like, what did you do at school this week? And they would say to you, nothing. I don't go to school. I don't like school. And the conversation would continue. And then you might say to them, well, what do you want to do when you leave school? And quite often what they would say is, I'd like to be a firefighter. And then you would just say to them, well, I'll tell you what, if you don't go to school, you'll never become a firefighter. Now, those are just little things. And we saw real benefits in the reduction in nuisance calls to the police. We saw real benefits in the reduction in the number of secondary fires. But the big lesson for us there was our ability to engage with people at different levels. And that engagement is often the first step in improving any outcomes, whether it be in education, in health and social care. And we see through community planning partnerships, through all different types of activities, that we can be key in that. And we will absolutely encourage it right across Scotland.
I'm going to move on. I was going to say politicians get attracted to fire engines as well. And guaranteed if you park it outside, they'll all be getting their picture taken in front of it for Facebook, let alone climb aboard and try on a hat. Now, a helmet, I should say Christian, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. We don't get distracted in the northeast because, of course, they've been white for some time, the fire engine. We'll go back
yes,
to
we've learned that this morning, whether we wanted to or not.
I wanted to go back to this community planning partnership and this community safety partnership. I'm struggling to understand. We got a lot of feedback from local authorities and evidence, written evidence, and all of them seems to be quite happy and content with what's happening. We had some evidence taken this morning, and you maybe have heard from Nick Croft, from Edinburgh Community Safety Partnership, was quite happy what's happening and thought it was community planning was now on the top of the agenda. Could you explain to us what's the legacy of the services beforehand, and how do you arrive to this? And is it all across Scotland, or do we still find it a bit patchy?
Maybe if I could come in first, and certainly the Chief can certainly come in. Before I came the Chair of Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, I stood down from local government in 2012. Prior to that, I was an elected member for 30 years in both Strathclyde region, then in South Lanarkshire Council. Although I was never a member of the joint board that was formed in '96 when local government reorganisation took place, I was never a big fan of the joint board setup, I have to say that. I thought the joint board did not serve the local authorities particularly well. And a matter of fact, in all my time as an elected member in South Lanarkshire Council, I never had a report from Strathclyde Fire at my authority, and I was on all the major committees within my authority, including the executive of the council and the Labour executive of the council as well. You know, I didn't think that we had a particularly difficult job to improve on the communication with local authorities than the previous, with two exceptions. I think Dumfries and Galloway and Fife, where the Fire and Rescue Service and police were part of the council itself. We have tried to develop a very positive working relationship with our partners in local government, and we were acutely aware as a board and as a management team that we now had their service, and that we are now charged with running their service. We took over a service that was extremely highly regarded within their community and highly regarded in any inspectorate that had a look at it. It was a very highly performing service, and we wanted to maintain that high performance and improve the communication with local authorities. Is that complete yet? No, it's not. I think we've got a way to go. But I think part of the key to it is not just the board communication, but our local senior officers. Our local senior officers are based within the authorities. They are working within the authorities on a day-to-day basis that never ever happened before. I think the likes of the legislation that put that in place is to be congratulated, that says that we should have local senior officers that were working with and to the local authorities. You know, so that has been a vast improvement. I think the board set up, where we have set up the board in geographical areas so that there is a relationship between board members and the authorities within that area, has also improved the situation, and I would hope to see that continuously improving. But is it a job finished? No, it's not. I think we're at the start of a process, and what we need to do is ensure that we continue along the lines that we've done, and local authorities and other partners are content with the communication and the relationship that developed with the board and the service.
There's not really much I can add to what Pat has said there. You know, I would pay tribute to the 8 previous services. You know, when I joined the Fire and Rescue Service, we were very much about emergency response. It was really only in the late 90s that we determined that that prevention aspect needed to be put on at least an equal footing with emergency response. So we started getting involved with our local communities at that point. And I don't think it's any coincidence that in the past decade we've visibly seen a 40% reduction in the number of primary fires and number of fatalities, you know, within Scotland, because prevention is, you know, on that equal footing with emergency response. As I said in my earlier response to your question, that one of the key things that we're really good at is engagement with people. People do respond to the Fire and Rescue Service. So I think building on the work that has been done by the 8 antecedent services, recognising that we have this, you know, almost unique ability to engage with a whole cross-section of the communities, working with local partners, and it is just the start of a journey. You know, I've got great hope, you know, for the future that the Fire and Rescue Service will play a full part as part of Team Scotland in improving outcomes for people right across the country.
Thank you. I'll just move on. Thank you. I've got John Finney, followed by Alison, then Sandra, then Margaret.
Thank you. A big part of what I was going to mention was picked up by Elaine there, but I wonder, Mr Hay, if I can ask you, please, on top of that quite transformational change in reduction in fire deaths and calls and fewer casualties, and you've talked about the engagement with partners to build on that. In your submission, you talk about hard-to-reach groups, and if I could touch on 2 of these, how specifically do you envisage that you'll be able to deal with the challenges of people with drug and alcohol dependencies, and perhaps particularly one of the categories you refer to as inexperienced youngsters in motor vehicles?
Yeah. I think to tackle both of those issues, it really does have to be a partnership approach. And certainly in relation to, you know, drugs and alcohol, there is, you know, bigger health and social care aspects of that. That if you look at the number of fire deaths that sadly still occur within Scotland, and indeed the number of you know, accidents that occur on the road, all too often drugs and alcohol are a contributory factor to that. So I think that what we need to do is in whatever little way we can, influence people through early years type initiatives, not to get involved in that journey. But equally, it might just be that what we can do is fire stations are seen as being a neutral venue. We can, it's a public building, we can make that a meeting place for people who've got specific skills, for example, from the voluntary sector that work with some of these hard to reach groups, so that not just our ability to engage with people, but also making use of the physical assets that are public assets at the end of the day are available in communities right across Scotland where people who have got the appropriate skills, and these are local, these are accessible, that they can get together and they can do the work that they need to do. In terms of specifically the number of young people that unfortunately continue to die on our roads, we are committed to and are involved in preventative programmes. Safe Drive, Stay Alive is one of the big examples of that many of the antecedent services were involved in. I have to be honest, it involves almost shock tactics, where you confront young people with the consequences of unsafe driving. It's a terrible statistic, but the biggest killer of teenage girls is teenage boys driving cars. Just telling them that and hearing it from a respected member of the community, like a firefighter, who can often tell a very personal story of their experience. Lots of examples like that, and working with partners so that we can continue to improve that and deliver it in an appropriate way. Those are the ways that I see us taking these agendas forward.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Move on now to Alison, followed by Sandra and Margaret.
Just on that point, does it disappoint you therefore that Police Scotland have withdrawn from those road safety initiatives?
May answer if you wish, but I think it's really, we're talking about fire reform, but please.
Well, we're just talking about partnership approach to dealing with road safety.
I know you'll find a way in with it, but just if you may, if you wish.
I wouldn't want to, comment specifically on the reasons why Police Scotland have made or not made that statement, but what I would say is that our experience on the ground is that within the police community, that work still carries on.
I have to ask you to respond to what Mr Duffy said in the earlier session, that the retained duty system is on its knees.
Convener, could I give Mr Hay a break and just go for that one? I was hoping someone would ask for a wee bit, because I did want to add something to Mr Duffy's evidence. It's worth saying that over the last 3 years, my team and I have been out and about over large parts of Scotland, so we've interviewed and met with many retained and volunteer firefighters. So what I'm saying is based on those discussions. Firstly, I agree almost entirely with what Mr Duffy said in his evidence. Just maybe the strength of language would vary between us, So I wouldn't describe the service being on its knees, but possibly fragile. The Inspectorate is due to lay a report before Parliament in May, and I think this will be one of the themes in the report that we'll pick up on. So there are, just to be clear, on our view on or where we potentially will report on this, that there are areas across Scotland where there's very strong RDS and volunteer units, very good, but there are also many areas where Mr Duffy is correct in saying things are fragile, and that's about recruitment, retention, providing availability during the day when staff don't work in town and so forth. But the main point I wanted to make in terms of the committee's meeting today is if you're considering the effects of reform, then none of these things are effects of reform. All of these problems are long-standing and predate reform. So if anything, I think there's an opportunity for the new National Service to start to address those issues. These are big long-term challenges which we face across Scotland and also across the UK. It's exactly the same pressure in different parts of the UK. So I'm hopeful that the new National Service will be able to rethink these things and come up with a different model.
Mr Waters, you want to come in?
Following on from that, I think we have looked at this very seriously, Alison. I think it's probably, and I'd agree with what John Duffy says, it's probably one of the biggest priorities we've got facing the service at the present time. There's been many attempts in the past to massage the retained duty system to try and make it work better. We can't massage it anymore. We have to look about how we deliver that service in our community. I mean, it's absolutely right to say that as we sit here today, there'll be engines that cannot get out of station because they cannot get a crew to actually take them out. We know that. We have set up a working group to actually look into that in great detail, to come back to the service and the board with a report about how we take this forward. It is one of the biggest priorities facing us to make sure that what we have got is a system that operates and delivers and reduces the risk right across Scotland, including some of our most rural parts of Scotland. And that has been one of our biggest priorities. We need to actually make sure that we address and find a solution to delivering a service right across Scotland. Whether you live in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Inverness, or you live in the most rural part of Scotland, you have got a right to expect us to deliver a fire and rescue service, and that's what we will aim to do.
Mr. Hay, do you want to, this is a very serious, obviously one of the most serious points to come up. Mr. Hay, do you want to comment?
It's absolutely one of the biggest issues facing the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and I would just underscore what the Chief Inspector said. This has been a long-standing problem that we've inherited, but I think we have an opportunity as a single Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to address this in a way that was more difficult for each of the 8 antecedent services. We've appointed Assistant Chief Officer Peter Murray to instigate a whole programme of projects that will begin to address some of the challenges within the retained, and we will do this in a partnership way. We've got the Fire Brigades Union involved, we've got the Retained Firefighters Union involved in this, and not least of which we've actually got the staff that work the retained duty system involved in this project. The way that I see the challenge for us is it is about the attraction and retention of staff, because lifestyles have absolutely changed since the 1950s. It's also about the availability of our fire appliances, our fire cover. We have between 60 and 100 fire appliances regularly off the what we call off the run, unavailable, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We have to address that challenge. And it's because of people's lifestyles, it's because of where they work. You've heard evidence earlier about the different skills that firefighters now have. There's a competency question there. How do we equip them? How do we support them? So we've got to ask all these questions. We've got to have a discussion around these things. But one of the earlier questions that was put to John Duffy is, how did the Fire Brigades Union see us resolving this? I don't think there is an easy solution, but certainly part of it is the reward system that's in place. The essence of the retained system is you get paid a retaining fee, and then the more fires you go to, the more emergencies you go to, the more money you get paid. Who designs a reward system that goes against the #1 aim of your organisation? Our #1 aim is to prevent emergencies occurring in the first place. So we really have to ask these serious questions, and I don't think it will be something that we resolve in the short term. Some of the inefficiencies we will tackle in the short term, but those bigger questions, that's the journey that we're on. Those are the questions that we're attempting to address at this moment in time.
Thanks. It's helpful to have that information. I mean, do you anticipate that there will always be a role for retained firefighters in the service, in some way or another?
Whether we call them retained firefighters or not, I don't know, but certainly, a combination of people who work for us on a part-time basis, people that respond from their local communities in a volunteering way, all of these things will be part of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service going forward. 40% of our operational workforce are retained firefighters. And they cover 90% of land mass in Scotland. They're integral to the success of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service.
Can I say that on behalf of the board? Absolutely. I think the Chief's absolutely right. Whether we call it retained or whether we don't call it retained, we need that part of our service, but we need that part of our service working. Last weekend, I was up in Oban with 25 volunteers whose commitment and skills is unquestionable, who were giving up a whole weekend just to get an additional skill and not to only to upgrade, but to maintain the skills that they've already got. You know, a tremendous commitment from people who have got other jobs that they do Monday to Friday. You know, so it's not the willingness that's not there. It's actually availability we need to look at. You know, so but yeah. I mean, can I say if we were looking at delivering it another way, we'd be sitting here saying you're going to have to double our budget.
It has two further follow-ups.
I was just going to say, is it a bit like having, for me, simply having an army that doesn't go to war? Your retained firefighter is a pool available all the time, even if nothing happens, they're there. And the thing that I think would concern the committee is, have there been instances where there have been consequences to an incident where we have not had retained firefighters, you have not had sufficient to man and to crew a fire appliance? Have there been consequences?
Thankfully, at this moment, I don't know of any serious consequences. But what I have is, I think the term Mr Torres used to me previously is guilty knowledge now, because we've got systems in place, electronic systems called Garton and Repel that we're using, so we know exactly what appliances are available where within the country. So if we know that appliances are unavailable, then if something was to go wrong, then quite rightly people would say, what did you do about it, Chief Officer? And you know, what we do at this moment in time is we move appliances about around the country to give us best a strategic fit as we possibly can in relation to the risks that are actually out there within Scotland. But ideally what we want is to reinvigorate in whatever form a retained duty system, because they've provided a fantastic service for their very local communities and for the people of Scotland in general.
Mr Torrey, have you any comment on that remark that I made and concerns that there might be, for instance, delays or whatever in an incident because there aren't sufficient firefighters to man to crew an appliance in an area required?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any specific examples of that. In the background, of course, there's always been standard operating procedures which will allow the next nearest station to cover. And plus, the only other thing I would add to that is when the Chiefs talk about a new electronic availability system, the evidence we are seeing is that's actually improving the situation a bit, because it allows the service to react, knowing that a station is undercrewed at a particular time. And an example we saw last month in the East Nuke of Fife, where the service is able to react and send people to cover, send additional staff into the East Nuke to cover during the day.
I think it's important to have clarity on that. If people are listening to this and you're telling us there's, I think you were saying there was fire appliances and there weren't sufficient crew to man them at times, that they would like to know in their area it hasn't affected an incident in their area. I think that's very important. Alison,
just two small follow-ups. You've set up a working group and you've said you've tried to be inclusive. Clearly any changes to the kind of structures in local communities will concern local communities. So have you involved local authorities, local elected members in discussions? And what's the timescale for your working group? When do you think you will come together with a way forward?
We will absolutely seek to be inclusive of local elected members, whether they be within this Parliament, or local authorities, or the Westminster Parliament, and engage the local communities in how they can support their fire and rescue service, because it's there for them. We will seek to do this. I suspect that this project will run for a number of years, because these are really tough challenges that we face, but it's not going to be wait until we finish this piece of work and then report. It will be a little bit of an iterative process. So, for example, we were up in Bewley and we were speaking to the retained firefighters in Bewley, and what they were telling us was that they used to have a really vibrant retained unit up there, and there used to be 3 shops, and in those 3 shops, I think one was a chemist shop, one was a grocer's, and one was a butcher shop. They were all members of the crew. They were local business people, and what they would then do is they would then drop everything, jump on the fire appliance and go and support the local community. But now what you have is a multinational company that owns the facility, and they don't let the staff go. And the people that are in the crew at Bewley Fire Station, they now, a lot of them are tradespeople, and they have to travel further and further afield, you know, to get suitable work. So they were a real example of the challenges that are being faced. But one of the things that they said to me is they had a local person that wanted to join, and it took 9 months for that person, between them engaging with the service and actually getting through the process. Now, I think it's invaluable that I get out and about around the country and I hear those things. So, you know, one of the big challenges that, you know, I've set for Peter Murray as he takes us forward is those type of inefficiencies, because people drift off and lose interest if it's going to take 9 months. And if we need people on the fire appliance, get them on the fire appliance. So we will be addressing, issues as we go along, as well as doing this bigger piece of work.
Sandra, Margaret, John Pentland.
Thank you very much, Convener, and still good morning. Good morning, gentlemen. Possibly my question does have an effect on what Alison was saying also, and I think Elaine had actually raised it as well. It was regarding Unison and the FBU, some of the questions were asked to them and the replies that they gave. When they're talking about people, no voluntary redundancies, people waiting that length of time, filling that space, basically, is there a time scale where you can say to staff, well, basically, yes, you can get this redundancy, we will put someone in your place? That was the first question I wanted to ask. And I know that Mr Waters had said to Elaine that absolutely people will be in place for April next year, 2014, I think it was, you said. Basically, I get, people from the trade unions come and speak to me, and they are...
Sandra, 2015.
2015, sorry. Thank you, Convener, for that clarity. I'm sure Mr Waters
it's a team effort
would have clarified. And their concerns are that whilst some of them want to take redundancy, they haven't been told yet, so they're in limbo of what's going to happen to the future. So I'd like a wee answer to that one. And...
first, okay. And then for a whole panoply of questions.
Right.
Can I maybe just come in for Sandra and then ask the Chief Officer to come in? I mean, there's a whole mix. For instance, if you take our control rooms, we can't shut our control rooms. We can't let our control room staff go. We've been in discussion with government, and government have very kindly extended how we deal with our control room, because if we, for instance, if we allowed staff to go under voluntary arrangements now and then had to change those voluntary arrangements sometime in the future, it would have seemed unfair when we're asking those staff to stay just now, even if they want to go in the future. So therefore, there has to be an opportunity for them to actually get up. Yes, I think there is undoubtedly a case, and our trade union colleague spoke about it. We are holding some vacancies because we know we've got people who are going to want to move into vacancies, and it's causing us a problem, but it's a time scale so that we can get that done properly. So therefore there is areas where we'll be holding vacancies to allow staff who are displaced to actually retrain or to go into these or to look about what they want to do. The voluntary redundancy situation, we went out for a trial. We have got people applying for it, and we're going to look again at another trial before the end of this financial year. That is it's not big numbers at the present time. Our probably bigger numbers are going to phase in over that 3 to 5 year period that we talked about, where we bring in the Stygian 10 as we look to merge facilities and move forward. And we have to make sure that when we do that, there are sufficient posts for people who are displaced as a result of that to actually make applications again to, if that's what they wanted to do. We will offer retraining, we will offer, like say, redeployment, we will offer transfer. But we've got tremendous examples. I mean, just to give you an example, as we sit here today, we've got staff from Aberdeen Control Room working in Dundee to share that local knowledge. We've got staff from Dundee working in Aberdeen, done absolutely on a voluntary basis because they wanted to do it, to share that knowledge. So the cooperation we're getting from staff, I cannot overemphasise our appreciation of the cooperation we've had from our staff, just to make sure that we get this thing working properly. Alistair.
I think that it's absolutely understandable that staff are anxious and they want certainty. And if I could give them that certainty today, I would give it to them. But it's just not possible. We have actually set out that all the transfer and matching would be finished by April 2016, which is 2 years from now. That's within our strategic plan. But what we're striving to do is to reduce that by a year if we possibly can, to give as much certainty to staff as early as we possibly can. But if you think about it, one of the projects that we're doing is, by way of an example, is we're bringing in a new payroll system, which is also a new HR system. So until you've actually brought that new system in, you've got to specify it, you've got to, install it. It's almost impossible to know exactly how many staff you're going to require to administer and use that system. So the matching the staff in also has to coincide with the rationalisation, legacy contracts, etc. So there's always that little bit of delay. But the promise that Scottish Government have made that there will be no compulsory redundancies, and that is absolutely supported by the board of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the senior management, gives a degree of reassurance to staff. And one of the reasons why we put the strategic intent in terms of what is going to happen with our property rationalisation as early as possible is it indicates our direction to travel, where our main buildings are going to be, so where the main places of work for staff are going to be. And the strategic intent does give us a footprint right across Scotland. So we're trying to give that type of assurance to staff. And although we can't tell them exactly what jobs they will get and when they will get those jobs, we've tried to demonstrate a genuineness that we will bring in change management policies that will support them as individuals by, for example, offering up 40 firefighter jobs solely to support staff. And I was fortunate enough on Friday to be at the second graduation as staff that have taken up that opportunity. And by staff taking on those jobs, when we say there'll be retraining, there is retraining opportunities. There's a really genuine one. And some of the staff that have moved into those firefighter posts, the vacancies that they've left have allowed other staff to move into the jobs that they would have previously done. So, we're very excited on that. And I listened this morning to the evidence that was given, particularly by Unison, in relation to communication. So, we're trying really hard. We have done one-to-ones with staff within the control rooms, but that promise is also out there that we will do one-to-ones with staff, within all of the premises that are affected. It just takes a little bit of time. But for me, there can be nothing more effective than sitting down in front of somebody and actually telling them what's happening, and then listening to their views on what is happening within the organisation. So we cannot give certainty to people, but we're trying to demonstrate a genuineness, to support them, and we will certainly build on the good start I believe we've made in terms of communications, and we will, redouble our efforts there.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate what you've said and the honesty there. Obviously, no compulsory redundancies. There's certainty that they've got their job, and if there's something comes up, they could retrain or move into that. The next question I wanted to ask was Mr. Duffy, John Duffy, had raised this particular point about transitional funding and timing, and asking for perhaps an extension of the time, the transitional funding. If anybody want to comment on that?
The financial challenges that face us are not unique to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Right across the public sector, we've seen a reduction in the amount of money that's available. Obviously, certain sections, have had a greater degree of protection, depending on the priorities of the government and this Parliament. So the whole reason behind the single Scottish Fire and Rescue Service was to protect the front line and to improve frontline outcomes. It was also to give people across Scotland a more equitable access to some of the nationalist and specialist resources that you've heard about. And it was also to reinvigorate that relationship with local communities through things like community planning, these local fire plans. But we have to do all that for less money. We have to drive cost out of the organisation by removing unnecessary duplication. But there is a recognition that to drive that unnecessary cost out of the organisation and remove that duplication, quite often what you need to do is pump prime the changes. So we have been supported for a period of 3 separate financial years with transitional funding money. We've used that transitional funding money to pump prime some of those changes, including offering up voluntary severance and early retirement, but also investing in new systems and new processes within the organisation. And, I respect John's view on it, but I personally don't see that we've had a problem with the transitional funding. But one of the things that I would stress is that looking for the period of the next 3 to 5 years, we received confirmation this week from Scottish Government that we can keep the capital receipts as we dispose of assets. So as we rationalise our property, we anticipate about £18 million worth of capital receipts. And what we intend to do at the moment, and these are indicative figures, is reinvest about £17.5 million of that back into the infrastructure of the service. So we're trying very hard to make best use of the money that's made available to us through transitional funding and the normal money we get, and we're getting support from government in the way that I've just described to you there. So you've got to look at the money as a whole, and you've got to think about what's the most sensible way to do that to make this a successful reform of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to hear about the capital receipts one. Pity we couldn't do something about the VAT, which would give us lots of more money. I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, but thanks very much for that.
I think you've commented on it. That's fine. Margaret, followed by John Pentland, please.
If I could just pick up again something that came from panel 1 and some of the comments you've made just now about the holding of some vacancies that have occurred under the voluntary severance and retirement plans. Now, I understand some of these are being held so that people could retrain from them. These are important jobs, maybe jobs where there's strategic decision-making to be made. But if I understood panel 1 correctly, there was a concern that by delaying filling these posts, perhaps the proper decisions weren't being implemented to allow more job matching and to move things on a little bit. Could you comment on that concern?
Again, I've heard that concern expressed this morning, and I'll go back and have a further discussion with my trade union colleagues on that. There's a fine balance to be struck. What we are trying to do here is carefully manage the vacancies within the organisation so that we can, as the new structures begin to roll out and come into place within the organisation, there is opportunities right across the country, for people to move into those jobs. And I do recognise that at sometimes what you see is people are still dealing with their old job and they're transitioning into the new job, and the workloads are different. And what I would say to staff is that if you find that a difficulty, and speak up, because we will be listening to that. And what we will do is we can take work away and we can get it done elsewhere within the organisation. I've got no doubt at all that we have got sufficient capacity to deal with everything we have to deal with within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. It's not necessarily all in the right place at this moment in time. But communication is a two-way process. I encourage my managers to speak to their staff. I encourage staff to speak to their managers, and if we do have issues that are coming up, local issues, then we will certainly seek to address them.
Both Mr Waters and Mr Hay have said categorically there will be no compulsory redundancies in the service, so that's answering the question that the guarantee will continue beyond April 2014. But I wonder if you could comment on the submission from Unison that says, whilst we appreciate the policy of no compulsory redundancies remains in place, we cannot ignore the fact that travel costs for many staff will increase massively massively as a result of these changes. Now, I think Mr Hay particularly mentioned Newbridge, and the facility there has no direct access to public transport, making travel to the site near impossible to those without a car. So I think really the inference is de facto compulsory redundancy. Has this issue been addressed?
Maybe initiate the discussion then, if Alistair wants to comment. I mean, certainly we have got areas where that is the situation. And when in the discussion with staff, if staff are going to transfer, we will look at what the transport issues are for those staff. If it's necessary, for instance, to put on transport to allow our staff to access accommodation that is difficult to get to, we will look at that and look at the ongoing costs of that and whether that is sustainable in the short term or the medium term and in the long term, and how we take that forward. You know, so I mean that's something where we have discussed and will be investigated as we know who's going to transfer to what and the options that will be there for them. And it'll be part of the discussion what we'll have with staff when we look at if that is an option they want to take up.
I'm sure that will give staff a lot of comfort because it seems to be quite a major issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Yes, John.
Mr Hay, you did, in response to Alison McInnes, mention that obviously there is an issue with retained firefighters and 70-80 fire tenders that are packed up, you know, every week. And I was just wondering how you would square that round if you're working on a reduced budget. Would that then mean that if you have to square that round, that the service in some other parts would need to be reduced or taken away?
What we have to look at is, you know, what are our priorities in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and what it boils down to is that we provide two services to our local communities. The first service that we provide is prevention and protection. We want to stop emergencies from occurring in the first place. And the second thing we do is provide an emergency response service. Now, there's lots of flavours and variations within both of those things, but it's the predominance of that work is delivered by firefighters working on fire stations, irrespective of the duty system that they're operating within. So when we look at our budget as a whole, then, as I've already said, the number one aim of reform is to protect the front line and to protect frontline outcomes. We have to do that within a reducing budget, but what we're doing is we're removing duplication wherever that occurs within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. So, for example, with our strategic intent, simply in terms of property costs, maintaining those properties, we're going to save £4.7 million. So the very reason why we're taking these, you know, extremely difficult decisions, and it is, you know, difficult for staff, you know, as to see, you know, buildings that they may have worked in for a number of years, for us proposing to dispose of them. It is difficult for staff, you know, when they've delivered the service and they've done a great job doing that, to see the changes come in. But the whole rationale behind doing it is to remove that duplication, release those costs from the organisation so we can spend it where it is most appropriate to do so, and that is absolutely on the front line. So to make sure that we protect the retained service and improve it, that is where we will be directing you know, resources as best we possibly can now and in the future.
Just one other small question. John Duffy said that you can't carry over surpluses. I'm assuming that he was talking about underspends, year-end underspends. Is that right?
Correct.
And do you find that a problem?
We now work, we used to work within the local government finance rules where we could hold reserves, carry over surpluses. We now work under the rules of the Scottish Public Finance Manual, and we cannot hold reserves. We're part of a wider justice family, and we can, you know, which includes, you know, police, prison, court service, etc. And there is opportunity, you know, for underspends to be moved between members of that justice family. But if I was being, you know, honest, the opportunity and the flexibility, you know, to carry reserves would be helpful in managing a budget.
John, can I say that it certainly would be helpful managing their budget, but as a service we've actually benefited this year from funds being transferred. We get 1.6 million, which we were then put into delivering, you know, the 16 new fire engines. I mean, 2 red ones will be going into Grampian, of course. You know, so that's assisted us. So we've benefited, but in budgetary terms on an ongoing basis, a year-to-year basis, would it be helpful? Yes, it would.
So you're telling us it's a two-way flow?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We've gained already.
Yeah. Why didn't they just spray paint those white fire engines?
Because the cost would have been too much.
About them. Was it really?
Can I say the cost would have been too much? As we are replacing or servicing the engines, we will deal with that matter. But we will not go out for a wholesale respraying of Grampian fire engines.
John, have you finished? Have we finished there, do you think, with the white fire engines?
I thought I was their convener when you intervened.
Well, you've been in twice.
No
you mustn't be grumpy. I want to thank you very much for your evidence, and I want to move on. Thank you for concluding that item. Move on straight to item 3. It's consideration of petition PE 1504. The petition was considered by the Public Petitions Committee on 18 February and asked the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to consider changing the current legislation on civil appeals from the Court of Session to the Supreme Court. The Committee agreed to refer it to us for consideration as part of our scrutiny of the Courts Reform Scotland Bill, and I think we could consider that as part of our scrutiny of Part 4 of the Bill. We're agreed.
Comment, please.
You may comment, yes.
Yeah, no, can I first of all declare an interest as a member of the Faculty of Advocates? The key point in this is whether a notice of appeal must be signed by 2
I can't hear you. Your microphone could be put closer. Just right, thank you.
The key point in this is whether the notice of appeal...
Can I ask people to leave a little more quietly? Thank you. Yes,
the key point in this is whether the notice of appeal is required to be signed by 2 Scottish counsel who must certify that the appeal is reasonable. What is reasonable was reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in a constituent of mine's case in April last year, where they referred to a previous House of Lords case as reminding counsel, Scottish counsel, it's contrary to the public interest at the time the House should be taken up with appeals which do not raise an arguable question of general public importance. The faculty in its submission on the question of appeals to the Court of Session made reference to the fact it's the faculty's experience that such party litigants often have difficulty obtaining signatures. If this arises, the party litigant requires to seek assistance direct from the faculty, and the faculty requires to nominate senior counsel to review the case pro bono, that is for nothing, and decide whether or not it's prepared to certify the case as reasonable. Between 2005 and 10, faculty received 5 such requests from party litigants, 1 in 2010, 4 in 2011, 2 in 2012 and 6 at this stage in 2013. It's not clear to me whether this petitioner made that approach to the faculty. It's also not clear to me from looking at the petitioner's case what the point of general public importance is. It's also the point is that in the Courts Reform Bill we are proposing to change that. I think that we should point out some of these points to the petitioner now. I'm minded to keep the petition open, but refer... Yeah.
Would be kept open. And I'm glad you put that on the record, and nearly call it the record. I'm glad you put that on the record, and I think you're right to do so. But the point is it stays open, and we'd consider all those points again when we come to our part of the Courts Reform Scotland Bill. So we're agreeable that it becomes part of that consideration of that bill.
The only point was Roddy had suggested that we maybe should return to the petitioner to ask whether she'd actually sought the advice of the faculty in terms of getting...
So, I've actually had a quick look at the case, but what exactly the point of general public importance is?
Is it worth going back?
So
that's now on the record, so if the petitioner wishes to write to myself as convener for the committee to see these points have been raised and these can be answered by the petitioner, but in the meantime, to confirm it stays open in any event. Don't look puzzled, it's all in hand. Right, item 4, want to move on to subordinate legislation. It's the consideration of Prisons and Young Offenders Institutions Scotland Amendment Rules 2014, SSI 2014-26. Now you'll recall that we first considered this instrument last week when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government Association of Visiting Committees for their views on the lack of transitional arrangements on this instrument as highlighted by the DPLR committee. We also asked for their comments and similar concerns regarding the proposed draft Public Services Reform (Prison Visiting Committees) Scotland Order 2014 lots of brackets, which we considered late last year. The responses have been received. They're in paper 3. Do members have any comments in relation to the responses received? Margaret, yes.
Committee's attention to page 11 of the Visiting Committee's submission. The final paragraph would question again the appropriateness of leaving it to the Scottish Prison Service to lead on drafting legislation in relation to visiting committees when SPS is the very body that visiting committees are established to monitor. I think if this is the case, and it would be good to have confirmation if it was, then that would be a matter of some concern for the committee.
Yes, I think, again, the Cabinet Secretary can hear that concern that's raised, and if he wishes to comment on it, to write to us advising, of your concerns that are raised, your concerns repeated from Neil Powry, convener of the Prison Visiting Committee. So if he's got opportunity to respond to that issue that's been raised, I think it's the Cabinet Secretary. It's the Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, I think it's sufficiently serious because this is the body that visiting committees
I hear you.
Looking at, and if they're legislating or
I can formally write and ask them to comment either
stronger.
One way or the other.
I think that would be stronger.
I think it would be important for a response. Bill Allison, sorry.
The other thing I would ask you perhaps to include in that letter then is page 10 of the response from the Association of Visiting Committees, where they say halfway down the page, in relation to the completion of an annual report, we regard it as essential that the legal requirement remains in place for this to be undertaken by Aberdeen and Peterhead for the period that they were responsible for, but the government doesn't appear to intend for this.
Right, so we raised that as well. We refer to those two paragraphs and ask the government for comments. Not a problem. Anything else? Yes?
To the transitional arrangements, was there something where as one body moves on, the other one just stops? I'm just wondering about those people who were involved in cases.
The Cabinet Secretary has said apparently that the cases are concluded. I'm looking at Annex A. There are no need for any saving transitional requirements for the statute to allow the visiting committees to complete their investigations. SPS recorded that with relevant visiting committees at the time of their abolition, there were no ongoing investigations. Yeah. It's in the papers. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. And what do I want to say? Right. We're moving now on into private session.
Are we considered this? We don't need to vote on this or anything. This negative instrument.
No, we've not got it. It's a draft. We haven't had the negative instrument yet. Since we've argued. We're discussing a draft. We've not seen it yet.
Yes.
Keep with the plan here, right? I know it's hard with everything we get thrown at us. We are now in private session, so we can be indiscreet. Now.